What if everything you think you know about Atlantis is wrong? For over 2,400 years, the story of a lost civilization has captivated humanity. A mighty island empire that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night. But here's what most people don't realize. The entire legend comes from just one source, one philosopher, one story that may have been designed to teach us something completely different than what we've been searching for. Today, we're going to uncover the truth about Atlantis. Not the Hollywood version, not the New Age fantasies, but what Plato actually wrote and why modern scholars believe his tale may be far more complex and far more disturbing than anyone imagined. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Atlantis has never been found, why it probably never will be, and why that might be exactly what Plato intended. You'll also discover how a real catastrophe that devastated an entire civilization may have inspired the most enduring mystery in human history. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about one of history's greatest mysteries. To understand the truth about Atlantis, we need to travel back to Athens, approximately 360 BCE. The golden age of Greece is ending. The great city-states are in decline, and in his academy, an aging philosopher named Plato is crafting what will become the most enduring mystery story ever told. But here's what's crucial to understand. Plato's dialogues Timaeus and Critias are the only primary sources for Atlantis. Every single mention of this lost civilization in the past 2,400 years traces back to these two texts. No Egyptian records, no other Greek sources, no archaeological evidence. Just Plato.in. The Timaeus, Plato introduces us to the story through a chain of narration that reads almost like an ancient conspiracy theory. The dialogues claim to quote Solon, who visited Egypt between 590 and 580 BC, stating that he translated Egyptian records of Atlantis. According to Plato's narrative, Solon learned of Atlantis from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. These priests told him of a great war that occurred 9,000 years earlier, making Atlantis roughly 11,500 years old from our perspective. The priests described a massive island empire located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. This empire, they claimed, was larger than Libya and Asia combined. It controlled parts of Africa up to Egypt and Europe up to Tuscany. Its capital city was a marvel of engineering, with concentric rings of land and water, magnificent palaces, and harbors filled with ships from across the known world. The island was ruled by the descendants of Poseidon and a mortal woman named Cleito. Their first son, Atlas, became the first king, giving the island its name. For generations, these rulers maintained justice and virtue, creating a prosperous and powerful civilization. But then something changed. The Atlanteans became corrupt, greedy, and aggressive. They launched a massive invasion against Egypt and Athens. And that's when divine justice intervened. In a single day and night, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by earthquakes and floods. The entire civilization vanished beneath the Atlantic Ocean, leaving only an impassable muddy shoal where the great island once stood. It's an incredible story, epic in scope, tragic in its conclusion, and detailed enough to feel absolutely real. But here's the problem that has puzzled scholars for over 2 millennia. If this really happened, where's the evidence? If you're already questioning everything you thought you knew about Atlantis, give this video a thumbs up. We're just getting started, and it gets much more complex from here. For over 2,000 years, explorers, archaeologists, and treasure hunters have searched for Atlantis. They've looked in the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, the Caribbean, Antarctica, and even outer space. The results? Absolutely nothing. Despite countless efforts, No credible archaeological evidence has ever been found to support the existence of Plato's Atlantis. This isn't for lack of trying. Modern technology has mapped the ocean floors, satellite imagery has revealed submerged structures around the world, and underwater archaeology has uncovered dozens of real lost cities. Archaeological discoveries of genuinely submerged ancient cities, such as the Egyptian port of Thonis Heraclean and the Greek settlement of Pavlopetri, prove that the technology exists to find underwater civilizations. These real lost cities show clear evidence of human habitation, artifacts that can be dated and studied, and architectural remains that match known historical periods. But Atlantis? Nothing. No pottery shards, no building foundations, no harbor works, no coins, no inscriptions. Nothing that would indicate a civilization supposedly larger than Libya and Asia combined, with a capital city more magnificent than any other in the ancient world. This absence of evidence becomes even more puzzling when you consider what Plato claimed about Atlantis's timeline. According to his account, this civilization existed around 9600 BCE, during the end of the last ice age. This would make Atlantis contemporary with the first agricultural settlements, thousands of years before the earliest known complex civilizations. At that time, humans were just beginning to develop farming. The wheel hadn't been invented. Writing systems wouldn't emerge for another 6,000 years. Yet Plato describes Atlantis as having sophisticated metallurgy, complex urban planning, and military technology advanced enough to threaten the entire Mediterranean world. But the absence of archaeological evidence isn't the only problem with the Atlantis story. There are also significant issues with Plato's geographical and historical claims. Plato places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. But geological evidence shows that there has never been a landmass of the described size in the Atlantic. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which some have suggested as a possible location, has been underwater for millions of years long before humans existed. Furthermore, Plato claims that after Atlantis sank, the area became impassable due to muddy shoals. But ancient Mediterranean sailors regularly traveled through the Strait of Gibraltar and into the Atlantic. If such an obstruction existed, it would have been well documented by other ancient sources. Yet no other ancient writer mentions it. The more closely scholars examine the Atlantis story, the more it appears to be exactly what it seems: a story. A carefully crafted tale designed by one of history's greatest philosophers to make a specific point about politics, morality, and the fate of civilizations. But that doesn't mean Plato made everything up out of thin air. Recent research suggests that he may have drawn inspiration from real historical catastrophes, disasters so devastating that they left lasting impressions on the collective memory of the ancient world. Around 1600 BCE, one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in recorded history devastated the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. This wasn't just any volcanic eruption. This was a civilization-ending catastrophe that may have inspired legends for thousands of years. The eruption was so massive that it caused the island's center to collapse into the sea, creating the caldera we see today. The resulting tsunamis and ash clouds would have had a devastating impact on the surrounding region. Ash and pumice from the eruption have been found as far away as Egypt and Israel, indicating that the effects of this disaster were felt across the entire eastern Mediterranean. Carbon dating confirms that this catastrophe occurred around 1600 BC, but the most intriguing connection to the Atlantis story lies in what this eruption destroyed. The Minoan civilization of Crete, one of the most advanced Bronze Age cultures in the Mediterranean world. The Minoans were remarkable. They built multi-story palaces with running water and sophisticated drainage systems. They created beautiful art, developed one of the earliest known writing systems in Europe, and established trade networks that reached from Egypt to Sardinia. Their capital, Knossos, was a marvel of Bronze Age engineering. Archaeological evidence shows that the ran pumice reached Crete, and the chaotic layer of sediment confirms that it was deposited there around 1600 BC, the same time that Thera erupted. The disaster that destroyed Thera also devastated the Minoan civilization, contributing to its eventual collapse. Spiridon Marinatos, the discoverer of the Akrotiri archaeological site on Santorini, suggested that the Minoan eruption is reflected in Plato's story of Atlantis. The parallels are intriguing. An advanced island civilization destroyed by a catastrophic natural disaster, sinking partially beneath the sea, Santorini, along with the nearby islands of Thracia and Aspronisi, once formed a large circular island before the eruption. This matches Plato's description of Atlantis as having concentric rings of land and water, perhaps a distant cultural memory of Thera's pre-eruption geography. But here's where the theory becomes both more compelling and more problematic. This view remains prevalent in popular culture but is not supported by current academic consensus. Limited evidence has been presented to support the theory that connects the catastrophe of the Minoan civilization with the lost Atlantis. The timeline doesn't match. Plato places Atlantis 9,000 years before his time, while the Thera eruption occurred only about 1,200 years before Plato. The geography doesn't match either. Plato specifically places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic, not in the Aegean Sea. But perhaps exact historical correspondence isn't the point. Perhaps Plato took fragments of historical memory stories of great civilizations destroyed by natural disasters, tales of advanced Bronze Age cultures, memories of catastrophic eruptions and tsunamis, and wove them into a story designed to teach a very different kind of lesson. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn into philosophy and politics. If you want to see how this ancient mystery connects to modern debates about power and corruption, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Do you think Atlantis was based on a real place, or was it always meant as a moral lesson? Here's what most people miss about the Atlantis story. Plato wasn't trying to write history. He was trying to write philosophy. And the real purpose of Atlantis wasn't to describe a lost civilization. It was to serve as a warning about the fate of all civilizations. The Critias is connected with the Republic, and Plato intended to represent his ideal state engaged in a patriotic conflict. Atlantis wasn't just any civilization. It was specifically designed as the opposite of Plato's ideal state, a cautionary tale about what happens when societies abandon virtue for power. Think about the structure of Plato's story. Atlantis begins as a perfect civilization, blessed by the gods, ruled by wise kings, and prosperous beyond measure. But gradually, the Atlanteans become corrupt. They grow greedy, aggressive, and proud. They abandon justice for conquest, virtue for wealth, wisdom for power. And what happens to them? Divine justice intervenes. The gods destroy Atlantis not because of natural disaster, but because of moral disaster. The civilization is literally swallowed by its own corruption. This isn't a story about archaeology or lost continents. This is a story about politics, morality, and the cyclical rise and fall of civilizations. Plato is using Atlantis as a mirror to reflect the problems he saw in his own society. Remember, Plato was writing during the decline of Athens. The city that had defeated the Persian Empire, built the Parthenon, and produced Socrates was falling apart due to internal strife, endless wars, and political corruption. Sound familiar? Plato sets up a direct comparison in his dialogues. Ancient Athens, virtuous, disciplined, guided by philosophy, defeats Atlantis despite being vastly outnumbered. This represents Plato's belief that virtue always triumphs over vice, that a just society will always defeat an unjust one, regardless of material advantages. Voice dropping, more contemplative, but there's an even deeper layer to the story. Some scholars argue that Atlantis represents not just political corruption, but the dangers of technological advancement without moral development. The Atlanteans possess incredible engineering skills, vast wealth, and powerful military technology, but they lack wisdom. This interpretation makes Plato remarkably prescient. He's describing a civilization that achieves great material success but loses its moral foundation and is ultimately destroyed by its own power. Does that remind you of any modern concerns about technology, environmental destruction, or the concentration of power? Plato describes Atlantis as a mighty Mediterranean empire that had subdued Egypt around 9,000 years previously, only to be vanquished by the earliest Athenians and ultimately destroyed by disaster. But notice the progression. Military conquest leads to moral corruption, which leads to divine punishment. This is why searching for the historical Atlantis may be missing the point entirely. Plato created Atlantis as a thought experiment, a philosophical allegory designed to explore questions about justice, power, and the fate of societies that lose their moral compass. The real question isn't where's Atlantis, but what can Atlantis teach us? And the answer is both timeless and urgent. No civilization, no matter how powerful, is immune to destruction if it abandons the principles that made it great in the first place. So why, after 2,400 years of searching, do people still believe in Atlantis? Why does this story continue to captivate us when scholars have conclusively demonstrated that it was almost certainly a philosophical allegory rather than historical fact? The answer reveals something profound about human nature and our relationship with the past. Atlantis represents our desire to believe that somewhere, somehow, there was once a golden age, a time when humans achieved something approaching perfection before losing it all. While neither archaeological nor historical evidence can conclusively prove or disprove the existence of Atlantis, the story continues to inspire new generations of explorers, writers, and dreamers. It's become a blank canvas onto which we project our hopes, fears, and fantasies about human potential. But perhaps that's exactly what Plato intended. By creating a story that feels real enough to believe but remains forever just out of reach, he ensured that each generation would rediscover his philosophical message in their own terms. The modern search for Atlantis with underwater expeditions, satellite archaeology, and computer modeling isn't really about finding a lost city. It's about exploring the boundaries between myth and history, between what we hope happened and what actually did. And in a strange way, our continued fascination with Atlantis proves Plato's point about the power of stories to convey truth more effectively than facts. His fictional civilization has influenced human thinking for over 2 millennia, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and scientific investigation. Some modern scholars now consider the story of Atlantis to be based on serious archaeological and historical data, while others maintain it was always purely allegorical. But perhaps the real genius of Plato's creation is that it doesn't matter which interpretation is correct. Whether Atlantis was inspired by the destruction of Thera, the memory of some other Bronze Age catastrophe, or purely by Plato's imagination, its message remains constant. Civilizations rise and fall based on their moral choices, and power without virtue ultimately leads to destruction. Standing on the cliffs of Santorini today, looking out over the flooded caldera where an advanced Bronze Age civilization once thrived, it's easy to understand why the Atlantis story continues to resonate. The evidence of catastrophic destruction is all around us, written in layers of volcanic ash and the ruins of Akrotiri. But the real power of the Atlantis story isn't in its possible historical connections. It's in its ability to make us think about our own civilization, our own choices, and our own future. Plato created Atlantis as a warning disguised as a mystery. He gave us a story so compelling, so detailed, and so emotionally powerful that we're still talking about it 2,400 years later. In doing so, he achieved a kind of immortality that no historical Atlantis could ever have provided. Every time we search for Atlantis, we're really searching for answers to fundamental questions about human nature. Can we build a perfect society? What happens when civilizations become too powerful for their own good? How do we avoid the fate of those who came before us? Perhaps the greatest mystery of Atlantis isn't where it is, it's why we need it to be real. And maybe, just maybe, that need tells us more about ourselves than any archaeological discovery ever could. What do you think? Is Atlantis a lost historical reality waiting to be discovered? Or is it Plato's greatest philosophical achievement? A story so powerful it became more real than reality itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this 2,400-year-old conversation. If this deep dive into the truth behind one of history's greatest mysteries fascinated you, you absolutely need to watch my next video about next video topic. And if you want to explore more of history's most enduring puzzles, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most important truths are